Hello and welcome to Infrastructure Matters, the podcast dedicated to exploring the dynamic world of infrastructure, asset management and public works. I'm your host, David Jenkins, Chief Executive of IPWEA. And in today's episode, we're diving into the sustainability and innovation in the heavy construction materials industry. Our special guest is Michael Kilgarriff, who's the CEO of the Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia, CCAA. And we'll be discussing the industry's key initiatives, including achieving net zero emissions by 2050, the importance of resources and addressing skills shortages. So grab a coffee and sit back and let's explore the transformative strategy shaping the construction materials sector. Stay tuned for an insightful conversation that promises to offer valuable insights and practical advice. Well, I'm delighted that we've got Michael Kilgarriff, who's the CEO of the Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia, joining us today. So welcome, Michael. Thanks very much for coming along.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
Now, I think what would be quite interesting for the audience is if just to understand a little bit more about Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia, because I know you've taken over relatively recently. So maybe you could just give us a bit of a background and I guess some of the key areas that you're looking at moving forward.
Sure. So Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia. So we call ourselves the voice of the heavy construction materials in Australia. So our members operate cement manufacturing and distribution facilities, concrete batching plants, hard rock quarries, sand and gravel extraction operations, really all across Australia. The industry pulls about 15 billion in revenue a year and employs about 110,000 Australians either directly or indirectly across the nation.
Yeah, wow, okay. So that's a big breadth of membership. How do you manage that? And I guess what are some of the key, because I understand that you run a B2B membership, who are some of the key stakeholders who are involved in the organisation?
So what we call the foundation members, the big five, Boral, Hanson, Wholesome, Cement Australia and Advocacy. Of course, Boral, recently privately acquired by the Stokes family through Channel 7, and Adbri has recently taken on a foreign equity partner or owner through CRM, which is an Irish company. So our big five companies certainly dominate most of the aspects of the industry that I talked about before, but we've got another 50 companies that are involved in quarrying, cement batching, cement importing, concrete distribution. So it's an incredibly diverse industry where we've got the big players right through to small family-owned companies all involved in the industry.
And what's your industry and what's your interest? Because you know previously in the roading space, you moved into this. I mean, there's a synergy there. But what's your interest or passion around infrastructure, and particularly around the sort of heavy construction side of things?
Yeah, good question. So my last two roles have been around in the freight and logistics industry, and then of course in the transport infrastructure roads space. And now, of course, with Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia, which, while they're all different, there is certain synergies that flow across those. And it is basically that infrastructure is something that changes lives, improves the general livability of communities, but also adds to the economic wealth and social wealth of the nation. Quite often, nations are judged by the infrastructure that they have in place to enable the free movement of people and freight around the country, the extent to which we can build even the appropriate infrastructure. It's not about just building any old infrastructure, it's about making sure that we rationally analyse the infrastructure requirements that we need and build them accordingly. So all of those things really go towards building the wealth and the social wealth of our country.
Yeah. And we were just talking at lunch just now, and one of the key areas that you're focused on is around sustainability. And at IPWEA, we've done some work around sustainable use of materials and infrastructure. And obviously concrete is a big area, right? Green concrete, and I'm not an expert in this, you will be. But where are you in this whole sustainability piece, and what are you doing? Are you doing, and will you be doing at CCA around sustainable use of different types of concrete materials?
Yeah, so CCA as an organisation has certainly come out and supported the net zero by 2050 policy that the Commonwealth Government has in place. And so we are advocating various ways of achieving that. And so one of the things that I've been working on over the last couple of months is developing a new strategy for the organisation. And that will revolve around advocacy.
Yep.
It will revolve around access, resource access. But of course, it'll also revolve around sustainability of the industry. So there's a number of different ways we can do that. And for example, the Commonwealth Government have recently released their infrastructure and transport decarbonisation roadmap.
Yep.
We're obviously very involved in developing submissions for that. So there's a number of things that both governments can do and industry can do. So industry has been very, very involved around the development of innovative cement and concrete products.
Yeah.
Those are world leading, and of course many of our companies are international companies, and they're bringing a lot of that innovation to Australia. But on the other hand, we can also have conversations with government about what governments can do about pulling through those products into the infrastructure that we're building on a daily basis. So
yeah.
the industry, if you like, is pushing innovative and green products, and we encourage governments to also put in place regulations and standards that encourage the uptake of those products.
So that's really interesting. So the outcome, and you said we support infrastructure net zero 2025. So that's the outcome. And what you're talking about is a carrot approach and a carrot and a stick approach. So these big organisations are coming, they're developing these innovative products, particularly around concrete, green concrete. But obviously there needs to be an understanding of that, but also regulation to encourage it. Would that be right? And do you think there's more to be done there?
Well, that's right. I mean, generally, the best approach, I think, when it comes to regulation is co-regulation, where industry and government collaborate on the best way to move something forward.
Yeah.
And quite often, of course, governments come up with regulation, but it's industry that will then need to put them into place and come up with the innovative ways to actually drive the best outcomes given the regulatory environment. So we need to make sure that governments are matching the policy objectives on one hand with the regulatory environment on the other hand that will actually encourage the achievement of the objectives that government has, which is net zero by 2050. And so we need to make sure that for example, in procurement practices, governments are putting requirements into those procurement processes to ensure that industry can actually be innovating and providing them with the best products that can achieve their policy objectives.
Yeah. And if we can, obviously IPWEA, our members, all local government engineers, they're at the coalface, they're delivering infrastructure for their local communities, contracts, not only looking after infrastructure, but developing it. What's their role when they're thinking about these types of new materials? Where can they sort of play a role in all this?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's a fairly powerful role, actually, in that innovation requires people to think a little bit differently than they may have always have been doing the same things.
Yeah.
And so it gets back to what I was saying before about putting in place both the regulation and also the procurement practices to ensure that, for example, you might be specifying a low carbon cement or concrete in your procurement that then the companies can actually supply. Because those products are there now. We just need to make sure that we've got the procurement practices in place to be able to deliver them. And of course, with the procurement practices, it also revolves around the fact that, again, you need to make sure that you've got the right standards and regulations in place that can actually allow for procurement processes to pick them up at a minimal risk for the contractee.
And have you seen anywhere, and this it could be Australia, could be further afield, where this is happening quite well and that there's sort of an uptake of these type of products? Or is it still pretty new?
No, look, I would say that, again, Australia has access to what I would call cutting edge new products in the cement and concrete industry. But where we have, for example, in the US, they've developed what we call a lower carbon cement, which they basically have allowed for by virtue of their regulations, which is yet to be picked up in Australia.
Yeah, right.
And so our role at CCAA is to encourage governments to be looking at best practice overseas, to be saying, okay, well, look, it's working well in the US and Europe. Why don't we have a trial of it in Australia to see how it goes?
And how do you think that the US and Europe, how have they sort of moved this forward? I mean, what was the change in the thinking? Was it lobbying and advocacy by certain groups? Was it a change of thinking? What was it? The ministers involved were...
Oh, look, as with all innovation and change, it's a combination of all of those things, really.
Yeah.
It was, I guess, government having policy objectives around decarbonisation, industry aiming to come up with products that can achieve that, and then, a joint industry government approach to amending procurement and standards to allow those products to be pulled through the system.
Yeah,
I mean that's really effectively how it's happened. And again, it's the role of CCAA to be having conversations with government about how we can make sure that the policy objectives that they're articulating can be matched by practical outcomes in terms of procurement processes.
Yeah, okay. The other area you said in terms of advocacy was sustainability, but also access to resources. What do you mean? Could you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So as I said before, over the last couple of months since I started, I've been developing a new strategy for the organisation, and it revolves around advocacy, sustainability, but also access to resources. Now, the interesting thing is that per year we estimate that there's actually 8 tonnes of aggregate required per person in Australia. Now, that aggregate and sand needs to come from somewhere, and quite often, of course, those quarries need to be in close proximity to the infrastructure that's being developed.
Yep.
So it's absolutely essential that that the industry has access to those resources, again, within close proximity to infrastructure. And Infrastructure Australia last year in their 2023 market capacity report drew attention to the fact that often these quarries can take between 5 to 10 years between initiation and production to actually come into play. And when you're talking about decisions that are being made by companies with a 10-year horizon, that has risk attached to it. But quite often we're finding, of course, that a lot of these quarries are not being approved, or they're being pushed out of the city areas. But of course what that means then is that the logistics task attached to the transport of those materials becomes much more expensive. The emissions attached to it are far greater. The wear and tear on the roads are far greater. So from our perspective, sustainability also means making sure that the resources that are required for the industry, being the aggregates and sand and even the cement concrete batching plants, are within close proximity to the infrastructure that it's servicing.
So because that all seems very logical to me. So what's the issue? Is it around the time it takes to sign off on new quarries? Is it the whole that sort of process? What is it that needs to change? Because that all makes complete sense.
Yeah, look, it's about CCAA having conversations with government about and reinforcing why it's important for their own objectives that we do expedite the development of these aggregate and sand quarries.
Yeah.
Look, all governments have competing priorities where all sorts of industries are seeking, registrations or permits or licences, it's really up to CCAA to be reinforcing to government and the community too, by the way, the importance of the industry and why it's important that these things, that these quarries are actually within close proximity to the infrastructure that it's servicing. And that goes for the housing market too, by the way. I mean, we've got these objectives of 1 million new houses in Australia in the next 5 years, and we talk a lot about housing affordability. Well, a good way to ensure that houses are affordable is to make sure that all the cement, concrete and aggregates that are absolutely essential to those houses can be provided affordably.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's because this whole drive for new housing as well. There's a whole lot of infrastructure's got to be built around that. They've got to pipes, wastewater pipes.
Yep.
There's a whole lot of infrastructure that needs to come in behind that, but also it's the proximity. And I guess, and what you said then is around, so that's really interesting because you said talk about advocating to government, but also community and making sure that the community understands some of these things.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not an easy task to be reinforcing to communities why a concrete batching plant or a quarry needs to be somewhere within the vicinity of their community. But again, it's about making sure that our industry respects their licence to operate and that they do everything they possibly can to mitigate any the adverse things that may come out of actually having that facility nearby the community. But again, it's about reinforcing to communities and governments that there is a reason why this is actually there, and it's about sustainability. It's about economic and environmental sustainability, and ultimately, it's about making sure that all of these big major infrastructure projects that we've got underway all across Australia at the moment can be delivered affordably. And quite often, our industry can be contributing anything up to 30% of the total cost. So the further that these things have to travel, the more it's going to cost the taxpayer. Yeah,
okay. I want to just pick up on, you mentioned the Infrastructure Australia Market Capacity Report, and obviously part of that is the whole skills shortage area, and we've talked at length about this, and engineers in general, skills shortage, and particularly local government engineers, which affects our members and the delivery of these things. In your world, in terms of skills shortage, what are some of the issues that you're facing, and what is it as CCA you're looking to put in place to sort of mitigate?
Yeah. So the Infrastructure Market Capacity Report, interestingly enough, said that across the infrastructure industry there was a shortage of about 200,000 people, as in 200,000 jobs that just haven't been filled.
Yeah.
And so from our perspective, we're also noticing that transport infrastructure is starting to evolve into energy, which is, of course, wind farms, transmission, across the whole hospitals, schools, defence. Now, all of those things pose quite considerable demand pressures on this industry. And so one of the, I guess one of the skills that the industry is seeing a big shortage of is truck drivers. And there tends to be a bit of a cycling through the industry where people work in the industry, then go off and work for a major trucking company, or in fact just leave the industry, go to the mines or things like that. So if we actually had access to a greater number of truck drivers, then you'd probably actually see some of the supply pressures in the industry start to ease off. But despite the fact that Australia is going through a fairly severe economic climate at the moment, there is also still considerable pressure from other industries like mining and others that are actually drawing people away from the industry.
Yeah.
So, look, truck drivers are just one, but it's people working in concrete batching plants.
Yeah.
Those sorts of skills, there really is a big shortage in the industry now.
Yeah. Just changing tack a little bit, still related, what is it you think that CCA and IPWEA, where do you think some of the areas, we've got crossover in not members so much, but certainly supporters. Where do you think we could work together in the future? There's a couple of areas you think we could work to?
Yeah, look, I come to this role with a bit of a background in collaborating with other industry associations, and I work on the basis that a lot of industry associations have certainly got their own areas where they need to focus, and that's effectively why they exist. But outside of that, in that broader Venn diagram, if you like, there are so many issues that we can work with other organisations on to achieve our common objectives. And I guess with CCAA and IPWEA, you represent a lot of the engineers that are running a lot of these projects, that may be drawing up some of the contracts, that may be calling up other standards and regulations in terms of the products that they may be seeking. So I guess the collaborative approach from me to IPWEA would be to work with us to ensure that the products that you're seeking are innovative, sustainable, and are fulfilling the broader objectives around emissions and decarbonisation.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, you've got an extensive background in, and this is sort of more around the association space for anyone in the association space that's listening, but you've got a very strong background that comes from advocacy and working, let's call it working with government. What are some of what's advice you would give to association executives around building a case to government? Because you've been very successful in this area, and as you said, advocacy is a key, one of the key pillars for CCA. What's a bit of advice you would give?
Well, I mean, for me, association always has to stand for something, and both the board and the employees and the members of the association have to know what the organisation actually stands for.
Yeah.
And so if it is an organisation that's involved in advocacy, and I recognise there are some that don't consider advocacy to be their positive suite, if you like. Yeah. My view is that a collaborative approach with government is often the best. Yeah. Putting out the press release to get a front page in the Fin Review can often be successful, but you're virtually guaranteed that you won't actually be successful in getting the outcome. So it's about working with government, and this is not about working behind closed doors where you're doing some deals or something like that. Advocacy just doesn't work like that anymore, at least. And so it's about having a positive relationship with government where government sees you regularly, they hear from you regularly, they know what you stand for, but the organisation itself is very focused on achieving the objectives that they have. An organisation, in my view, that has so many objectives that they're just scrambling to try and deliver on them all, ends up actually achieving nothing. So it's about being focused, being seen, communicating what your objectives are, and making sure that government sees you as a collaborative partner.
Yeah, great advice. And it's a long game, typically. It's not always a short game. It takes time.
It is indeed. I often say it's a bit like going to the gym, where you can go one day and come home and you won't really notice much difference, but 6 months later, you might start to notice that there's a bit of a difference and you're starting to change. And that's exactly how advocacy works.
Not at my age. It takes about 8 to 12 months. And the final question, if we were to sit down, and hopefully we will, before this, but another couple of years, where would you like to see CCA be in the next couple of years?
Well, certainly as an organisation, I think it could have a more diverse and greater depth in terms of the members. I think there's a lot of companies out there that are involved in our space who, for whatever reason, are not members of CCAA. So certainly I'll be approaching those companies to, articulate our strategy to them and identify why they ought to be members. So it's basically about a membership that actually represents the entire sector. It's about a strategy that aims to achieve outcomes, and also being able to identify that after 5 years there have been outcomes. And it's also within the broader industry and government stakeholder space, respect for the role that the organisation fulfills in articulating and advocating for its objectives.
Yeah, what a great way to end. Michael, thank you ever so much. It's been a great conversation. And I think our viewers, our listeners, will take a lot away from this. And I certainly share your sentiments around, well, a lot of your sentiments, but particularly just around how associations can work together to achieve outcomes. And there is a lot of crossover, and I think you're spot on. I wish you all the very, very best in the new role. I think you'll be fantastic, and we look forward to working with you now and into the future. So thank you.
Thanks, David. It's been great to be here.
And that brings us to an end of another episode of Infrastructure Matters. A big thank you to our esteemed guest, Michael Kilgarriff, for sharing his invaluable insights on sustainability and innovation in the heavy construction materials industry. To our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope today's discussion has broadened your understanding of the critical role of construction materials in our infrastructure. Be sure to stay tuned for future episodes where we continue to explore the dynamic world of infrastructure and public works. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review Infrastructure Matters on your favourite platform. Follow us on social media for more updates and exclusive content. I'm David Jenkins signing off and reminding you that in the realm of infrastructure, every detail matters.